So, welcome to my Voyages exhibition here at Cornwall Contemporary. And before we start looking at some of the paintings, I'd just like to talk a little bit about why I've called this exhibition Voyages. And to cut a long short story short, it's 10 years ago this year since I had a chance encounter and was able to pick up my paintbrushes again, which I really hadn't picked up since my 20s, and start developing an art career. And over the last 10 years, a great deal has happened to me, not least having my first solo show with Cornwall Contemporary here in 2018, and then being soon after that being commissioned by English Heritage to do a painting in response to Tintagel Castle, which is in North Cornwall, for their membership guidebook and members cards. And then following on from that, I was asked to produce a book called David Mankin Remembering in Paint, which is now in its third reprint and is available all over the world. So it's been quite a journey, and then last year I was asked to go to Pooch Cove in Newfoundland for an artist residency for 4 weeks, which was a wonderful experience, and you'll see later a painting which I began there and completed back in Cornwall. So it's been a kind of incredible journey for me from that chance encounter back in 2013. So, but the real voyage for me is the kind of voyage of painting. So, and each of these paintings you'll see here today are kind of mini voyages on their own, because my painting process is very much about the possibilities, exploring possibilities, discovering new things, transition, change, and I'm continually moving these paintings forward to try and find the essence of what I'm after. So that's the real voyage for me, the process of using the paint, the mark making, the transition. So my work is about landscape, but I'm not attempting to mimic a view. I'm trying to remember through paint what I feel about not only what I'm seeing, but hearing, touching, smelling and tasting. The work is about how those fleeting moments of sensory experiences affect you, one's mental state, and how they shape our lives and experiences. It's really that emotional pull of the landscape and its unique energy. In particular, it's the Cornish landscape that has captured my heart and inspires my thinking and work. For those of you who know Cornwall, it's a place that infects the mind and seems to have a magnetic attraction. A 40-year romance which still has a way to go, in particular the area where I live, which is called West Penwith, which includes Penzance, where we are today. Penwith sits at the far western tip of the Cornish peninsula, surrounded by sea, just 6 miles across from coast to coast. It's an ancient, timeless land, carved out by the elements. From the cathedral-like cliffs of the north coast, with its headlands jutting out into the Atlantic, across the wild moorland from Zena, down to hidden sandy coves of the wide expanses of Mounts Bay. It's this contrast that excites me, combined with the force of the weather and the ever-present sea, the great unknown. From the wild raging winter storms, when huge seas are tugging endlessly at the coast, to the driving winds that really rip through you, rain that needles you. It's also the view of desolate beaches, mounds of seaweed, and the odd lonely oyster catcher. To the days of early summer, when wildflowers carpet the coast and the scent of gorse hangs in the air, that sense of calm. it's these changing, swinging, shifting moods and atmospheres, the textures, the forms, the colours and the smells which unlock the senses at every turn. And it is these experiences that make my heart beat faster. And that's what I want to express in my paintings. There is a rhythm, a pulse, a sense of freedom I experience in Cornwall that grabs me and inspires me to paint in this way. It's a translation of my experience, not from a single day or moment, but the paintings are built out of multiple moments and experiences in the landscape, which filter through my mind and then eventually spill out onto the canvas when I'm back in the studio. So it is these fragments, sensory experiences of being in the landscape that excites me. Unlocking those senses, thoughts, feelings, memory and imagination. That's what I'm attempting to embody in these paintings. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about beginnings of paintings. And one of the approaches I take and is important to me in the process is the sketching process. And this is a small sketch that I made earlier this summer for a large painting called Mankin Coast. And it was made in a small cove near my studio, looking out towards Coven Point, which is a beautiful headland jutting out into Mounts Bay. And it was such a beautiful day, and the colours were intense, and that's why you'll see these very kind of intense colour marks and crayons. But I used this as the basis for the large painting in my studio. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about the painting Mankin Coast. This is a 160 canvas, and it's a piece that began life via the sketch. It was one of those days which, you know, I kind of remember distinctly. The kind of cliffs were kind of alive with wild gladioli, pink thrift, and there was the yellow gorse in abundance covering the headlands and, you know, giving off this sweet, nutty coconut smell. Lichen was everywhere, covering the rocks, trees and gorse bushes. And the beauty with lichen, some is this kind of intense orangey rust colour. Other lichen is more umbry, stone coloured, and then often you get this beautiful limey green colour, which I've used, I've used all these colours in the painting. And then also there's fields which punctuate the landscape. Almost, it's one of those times of the year when there's almost too much inspiration. There's inspiration at every turn. But it's a time to get out and walk the coast path and really drink in the views, linger, ponder and wander. Colours are intensified. The breezes are softer and warmer, the sea seems to have more sparkle, the waves are whiter, and the gulls seem freer than normal. It's a magic time. So I wanted to embody in this painting the kind of mood of early summer on the Cornish coast and the feeling of the dazzling prospect of a kind of endless summer ahead. So this is another approach, and I'm holding one of my sketchbooks here, and most of my sketches are done on different bits of paper individually, and then over time I'll curate a sketchbook and put them all together, and then I'll refer to them for future use. And often they become starting points for larger pieces. And this particular sketch here, which was made out of collaged elements, so I took an element from a previous large painting and cropped into a small area of it, and then collaged different elements into it and drew on top of it. And I kind of really liked the way this was feeling in terms of its atmosphere. So I decided to make a larger version, which worked out well. And it's this painting that you see on the wall here, which is called The Waking Shoals of Light. And I gave it that title, which is a beautiful line from a W.S. Graham poem. And it reminded me of the kind of Newfoundland harbour, which is just down the road from Penzance, and it's one of Cornwall's major fishing ports. And it just had that lovely feeling of the dawn over Newfoundland harbour. So this is another piece, and it's called Cadgwith Morning Tide. Cadgwith is a small fishing cove on the Lizard Peninsula in Cornwall, and it's a place very close to my heart because when we first came to Cornwall in the mid-90s, we stayed there quite a lot, and we got to know the cove and the surrounding coastline really well. So I've done various pictures of Cadgwith over the years, and this particular piece came from a work on paper which I made last year, and I wanted to do a slightly larger version but amend the palette. So it's a slightly more figurative painting than some of my work, but it's very representative of the cove, where it's still a working cove where the fishing boats are pulled up onto the beach, and it's a small beach where the boats sit, and I wanted that kind of sense of that early morning tide coming in and the boats being readied for their day at sea. So this is another painting that began from a really a kind of walk that I made from Morva to the Gurnard's Head on the north coast of Cornwall a year or so ago, and I took lots of photographs and videos, and this is a small sketch I did back in September last year, which again I thought would work as a larger piece. So I began it as a larger piece, and I used the kind of same palette that I'd used on the sketch, but when I kind of got to a certain point with the painting, it wasn't really working the way I wanted it to work. So this is obviously a critical part in the process, which I often get to, and I tend to call it a precipice moment, where I'm not quite happy with the painting, but it's looking reasonably good. But I'm kind of almost use it's kind of quite impulsive in a way, but I make a dramatic edit. And with this particular piece, I decided to basically glaze it in this very kind of strong, deep blue, which I did quite quickly, and then the scratch lines at the top were made, and then very quickly as the paint was drying, I did this kind of huge shape scratching through the layers, and then back up, which really helps connect the whole painting. And then I wipe back through to create this huge kind of crashing wave shape, and then it kind of had this wonderful feel to me of these kind of like cliffs, which I've experienced at Morva. And there's a famous ridge there called the Bossigran Ridge, which is a 200-metre ridge where it's very famous for climbers, and that's why I've given this painting the title Great Cliffs Knife Edged. So yeah, I'd just like to talk about these two pieces now, and both these pieces didn't really come from a sketch. They really began by just creating a dialogue with the canvas and seeing where that took me. And I call this approach more of an emergent approach, an unfolding approach. And this particular, and both these paintings were also kind of driven along by lines of poetry, which I kind of had in my mind, and was sitting there, and they were making me think and pulling me in certain directions. And this one is called The Rising Octaves of Dawn, which is a line from a lovely poem called Newfoundland by John Edwin Pratt. And it's one of those lines that just stuck in my mind. And when I started this painting, when I made this huge dark sweep, and right at the start, this area, it was quite messy, but I left it, and then when I left it for a bit, I saw this particular piece here, which almost to me looks like a figure walking with the cloud behind, walking on a beach at dawn. So it helped me, that link helped me push this painting in a certain direction, and I developed the palette. And for me, this really has that sense of early summer dawns, when sometimes you get out in June and July, when it's light at 4, 5 o'clock, and it's such a magical time of day, because it's almost like the world is awakening, and the first waves are crashing in, and it's just the most magical time. So, and similarly with this painting, Crossing the Bar, which is the title from a famous Tennyson poem, and it relates to a short break we had in Salcombe earlier this year, and Tennyson he apparently wrote or it relates to a poem that he wrote about Salcombe, because Salcombe has a famous sandbar which can be quite treacherous to sailors at certain times of the year, and when tides are moving in certain directions. So those two that element of literature and poetry kind of helped me push these particular paintings in a certain direction that I wanted, which is fascinating. So this is another piece which is called the Towers of Wild Speed and Whiteness, and it's a very expressive piece and very much inspired by a small village further down the coast called Porthleven. And when winter storms are raging in Cornwall, Porthleven often gets hit quite hard, and you can often see the ferocity of the sea kind of tugging away at the cliffs and crashing into its small harbour. And I just wanted that sense of that the spitting surf and the wildness of the waves as it kind of really covers this kind of small village. So I'm always looking for those little starting points. Sometimes I just start, and I'll put shapes on or do something, or I'll put a shape in my sketchbook and I say, well, I'm going to use that. So I like to try and be as random as possible, but in an organised way. So to get that variety that I want, and that dynamism, the energy that I want. When I'm painting it. So that was quite that was a big thing. I was daring with that painting. Well, I do the charcoal. I find easier. But when you're doing the fine line, sometimes I find that more challenging.
So Night Traveller. Are you the traveller?
No, it's just that painting developed into that kind of moody painting you see, and I just love the kind of sense that it had, that really when I you may see different things.
See a train going along.
You might see a train, some people might see kind of little houses, some people might see a desolate beach down here, some people might see something else going on here. So there's lots of different things going on in that painting, which you can interpret in lots of different ways. And I like it because it was built out of just a process of me trying different things and a spray paint on there, there's that line through the middle, and it just built because I was trying different things.
Yeah.
And that's the way it came to be. So it was almost, I love the Night Traveller title, that's quite evocative, and it's, you know, it's kind of, it's a journey, it's a voyage, it's taking you to different places. So this particular painting is probably the most travelled painting in the exhibition. As I mentioned earlier, I was invited to an art residency last November in Newfoundland, a small remote fishing village called Pooch Cove. And this painting really, it was the first painting that I began at the residency, and really encapsulates my my initial impressions of the kind of Newfoundland landscape, which is not dissimilar from the Cornish landscape, but it has its own unique qualities. Certainly a kind of epic quality, and the kind of Atlantic Ocean seems even bigger there than it does here in Cornwall. So it's a kind of wild, remote place, and this painting tries to encapsulate that sense of drama, sense of epicness, sense of grandeur, and the sense of kind of raw beauty. Also, there's the coast is covered with pine forests, so some of the charcoal work here for me is inspired by those forests, and often along the kind of coast path, or the East Coast Trail as they call it in Pooch Cove. There are many kind of skeletons of pine trees which have been burnt by the winds and eroded by the elements over time, and they're kind of these beautiful curling shapes that just stand proud above the kind of cliffs that kind of plunge down into the ocean. And then this painting is the last painting I'd like to talk about, and it's called "The Tide Rises, the Tide Falls, the Twilight Darkens, the Curlew Calls." And it's one of those paintings that for me kind of embodies a great deal of what I try and achieve through my paintings. It's a large piece, 122 by 185, which is a slightly kind of challenging format for me, and it began life 2 years ago, and it's become my voyage painting really in my own mind, because its development really relied on impulse and intuition, risk-taking, and responding to what it kept telling me. So it was one of those paintings that just oscillated, changed, seesawed. It kind of frustrated the hell out of me at times and challenged me. So it's been a great voyage and process, and tested my patience. But ultimately, I feel like I've unearthed a painting that I'm really proud of, and it communicates on many levels. The sense of sea, the vast feel of the landscape, a sense of journey, the excitement and the fantasy of distance, beautiful tension balanced with a reflective quality, and multiple windows and areas of association, paintings within paintings. So I feel that this painting for me will reveal lots of secrets over time. And recently, I think before we finish, I just want to mention two connections that came together at the end of making this painting. Recently, I've come across the work of the famous German romantic painter from the 1700s called Caspar David Friedrich. And he made these wonderful, emotive landscapes. One of the famous ones being Monk by the Sea, and another Wanderer above the sea and fog. And they both feature these lone figures looking out into this vast unknown. And in this particular painting, there is, towards the bottom of the painting, there is a kind of, for me, which was purely accidental, there is an emergence of a figure in a similar way looking out into this vast landscape. So that was a really lovely connection, a kind of personal connection that came towards the end of the process. and the other was the title, the poem, which is a poem written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. And it's a sombre poem, but it's beautiful. It's about life's journey and life's onward journey. But it really resonated with me and fitted, or I felt it fitted with the mood and the atmosphere. So I'd just like to read it before we finish. The tide rises, the tide falls, the twilight darkens, the curlew calls. Along the sea sands damp and brown, the traveller hastens toward the town, and the tide rises and the tide falls. Darkness settles on roofs and walls, but the sea in darkness calls. The little waves with their soft white hands efface the footprints in the sands, and the tide rises and the tide falls. The morning breaks, the steeds in their stalls stamp and neigh as the hostler calls. The day returns, but nevermore returns the traveller to the shore, and the tide rises and the tide falls. So yes, it's a very sombre, slightly poignant poem, but a beautiful one. So for me, it's this coalescing of paint on canvas, words, connections, ideas, thoughts, feelings and emotions, which make the voyage of paintings an artistic endeavour such an important part of life. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to me today about my process and my work, and I hope you've enjoyed seeing some of the specific paintings we've managed to look at as part of this Voyages exhibition. Thank you.